the tree of knowledge, one of two trees God planted in the middle of the Garden of Eden. I received some really good questions about the tree of knowledge, and I thought it was worthwhile to share here my responses to those questions. The first one is, what is the ontological nature of the tree of knowledge? I believe that the account in Genesis 2 and 3 to be historical, not allegorical. I believe it is history, that the events of the creation truly happened the way the Bible says. But I also believe that these two trees, while being literal trees that you could see and touch and eat from, also serve as symbols. And they also serve as an indicator of something. I'll talk more about that as I get into the other questions, but right up front, just want to answer that question about the nature of the tree itself. The next question is, why did God tempt Adam and Eve by putting the tree of knowledge in the garden? First of all, I think the word tempt there might imply that God wanted them to eat from the tree of knowledge, and I don't believe he wanted them to eat from that tree at all. In fact, he warned them about it and told them not to. But I understand how the trees were there, and while he told them not to eat from them, they could if they wanted to. It was sort of as though he said, you may not, but you can. You are not allowed, but you are able, which is a very important aspect of that tree. And here's where the two trees really together, become symbols in addition to being literal trees. And this is how these two trees become indicators of something very important. The fact that God still made it possible for Adam and Eve to eat from the tree of knowledge shows that he was giving them options. He wasn't putting a tree there and not giving them the ability to choose to eat from that tree. But he did make it clear to them what these two trees were about. He said, you eat from this tree, you live. You eat from that tree, you die. So I don't want you to eat from that tree, but you are capable of it if you so choose. So in that way, these two trees being there, and perhaps right next to each other, it says they both were in the middle of the garden, they represented two options, life and death, and they represented God giving humanity freedom to choose between the two. And these two options, life and death, are really about trusting God or not. Did Adam and Eve truly believe that God's warning was valid? Could they truly trust that I'm not quite sure what this death thing is, but if God doesn't want us to have it, I'm going to steer clear of it? That would be showing that they trust God and his love for them, his wisdom in knowing what is truly best for his creation. Or they could have said, you know what? I don't know. God told us that, but we'll see. If God really knows what he's talking about, or if God really cares about what's best for us, I don't know. The jury is still out. So that's really what these two options were about in the bigger sense. And the life and death aspect of them were the direct consequences of making that choice to trust God. If you trust God, you will live and live and live forever, because you'll be eating from the tree of life and not from the tree of knowledge. But if you eat from the tree of knowledge, showing that you don't really trust what God is telling you about it, you're not really trusting his love and his wisdom, then the direct consequence of that is death. Because When trust is broken, a relationship breaks. We know that from personal experience, don't we? And when the relationship, the connection between creator and creation is broken, the natural consequence of that is death. All right, the next question is, how were Adam and Eve to know it was wrong to want to be like God if they didn't have knowledge of good and evil? Why wouldn't someone want to be like God? Now, this question gets into what the serpent said about the tree of knowledge. We know from other passages in the Bible that that serpent was the devil. The devil had taken on the form of a creature, a serpent, and was in this tree and told Eve, if you eat from this tree, you will become like God, knowing good and evil. So the question here, how were Adam and Eve to know that that was wrong? Wouldn't it be a good thing to be like God, the perfect one, the creator? How are they supposed to know that if they didn't have this knowledge to begin with? Seems like a catch-22. I think, first of all, it's important to understand what kind of knowledge this is. It's not informational. It's not as though they were lacking certain information that eating from this tree would give them. Rather than an informational knowledge, it is an experiential knowledge. God did not want them to know evil in the sense of He didn't want them to experience evil. He didn't want them to know what evil was like in that sense. That doesn't mean that He didn't want them to know or that they didn't already have some informational knowledge about evil. So Adam and Eve already had some informational knowledge of good. They must have known some things, some bits of information about God, the Creator. They certainly had experiential knowledge of good from their interactions with, their relationship with God. And I bet that they had some informational knowledge of evil as well. Before the devil was on earth, he was in heaven, an angel created by God. He was known as Lucifer then. The Bible tells us in other places that this Lucifer, this beautiful, wonderful, created angel of God, who was very close to God, rebelled against the Creator. There was a war in heaven, the Bible tells us. And Lucifer was cast out of heaven. He was thrown out and thrown onto the earth. That's how he got there. And I bet that Adam and Eve knew about that. I bet they had that informational knowledge that there had been this wonderful Lucifer who had become this horrible Satan or devil. So I don't think we could say that how were Adam and Eve to know when they didn't know anything? I think they did know some things. But how are they to know it was wrong to want to be like God, which is essentially what the devil was telling them this fruit would do for them? Why wouldn't someone want to be like God, their creator? And here I think it's important to see how there are two different kinds of likeness. You could be like God in this way, or you could be like God in that way. If you go back in the account there in Genesis, when it talks about the creation of man, of humanity, of human beings, it says that God created them to be like Him. He created humans in His image. That is, in His likeness. So, and Adam and Eve must have known this. So they knew that they were already like God in one sense. So what is this that the devil is telling them? That, okay, you might be like God in that way, but you could be like God in this way. There's two different kinds of likeness going on here. And it's important to understand that God created humans to be like Him in His goodness, but not in His greatness. A very important distinction. We are supposed to be like God in character, but not in authority. In fact, that was Lucifer's downfall. The Bible tells us in Isaiah 14, verses 12 to 14, "How are you fallen from heaven, O Lucifer, son of the morning? For you have said in your heart, I will ascend to heaven. I will exalt my throne above the stars of God. I will ascend above the heights of the clouds. I will be like the Most High." Contrast this with humans being created to be like God, and here is an angel in heaven aspiring to be like God, and that being his downfall. See, there are two different kinds of likeness. Lucifer wanted God's throne. He was not content to be like God in character. He wanted God's authority. So it's important to see this distinction of being like God. There's a way in which he wants us to be like him. In fact, he created us to be that way. And there's a way where aspiring to be like him could be the end of us. Now, the next question is, the story seems to be saying that Adam and Eve should have known better. But how? Another good question. It helps me to think of it this way, that God and humans have a parent-child relationship. God is our Father, the one who made us. So consider a scenario where a mother tells her small son, "Don't touch the stove." And the child doesn't even know what a stove is. He's so young, he's so inexperienced in life, but he knows his mother told him, "Don't touch the stove." So if he touches the stove, would we say he should know better? Well, let's think about that. He does have a track record of some kind with his mother telling him, do this or don't do that. And has she been right before? Has he learned before that he should trust that she knows what she's talking about and that she really cares about him and loves him and doesn't want him to get hurt? So he has some track record of his mother, but that track record is short. Granted, he's a small, young child. He hasn't matured much yet. So similarly, should Adam and Eve have known better? They had a track record with God. God had told them things, and they had learned from experience that, wow, God really knew what he was talking about. God really does love us. He's trying to protect us from this or that, or he wants us to have this or that good thing. So they had some track record with God that had built up that said, yeah, you can trust him. Granted, that track record was short, and humanity had not matured much at this point. Just some things to think about. One of the things God was training humanity in is that choices have consequences. That's something a child learns as he grows. Choices have consequences. You eat from this tree, you live. You eat from that tree, you die. But God isn't just sitting around saying, hey, y'all got into this mess, you can get yourselves out of it. A parent of a small child wouldn't do that if the consequence was grave. So while choices have consequences, God threw humanity the biggest lifeline ever. In Jesus, God himself coming to earth, becoming human, and dying in our place, taking on that direct consequence of eating from the tree of knowledge in our place if we accept it. God is not some callous parent saying, hey, you got into this mess. So while it's a mess, granted, he throws us this lifeline of grace. The next question is, if Adam and Eve didn't have knowledge of good and evil, how would they know God was good and the devil was evil? Well, I've talked some about this, that they had some knowledge, both informational knowledge and experiential knowledge of good. They were operating on some of that. And I believe that they had some informational knowledge of evil, having been told about, learned about Lucifer and his downfall. The next question, why does eating of the tree of knowledge bring inequality strife, etc., into the world. It seems to be saying that the knowledge of good and evil causes evil and imbalance. In Genesis 3, after Adam and Eve eat from the tree of knowledge, God says, because of this, there is going to be some suffering. And he went on to describe what that was going to look like to some degree. Sometimes we refer to this as the curse. We already know that the direct consequence of eating from the tree of knowledge is death. God had said, you eat from this tree, you will surely die. That's direct consequence. Now, Adam and Eve didn't drop dead when they ate from that, because the surely die that God spoke about was not that kind of death. The Bible tells us there's a first death and a second death. This was a reference to the second death. That's the death from which there is no resurrection. It's it. That's the end. And I talk about that in depth in my series on death and hell. But for here, just to point out that the direct consequence of eating from the tree of knowledge was the second death, which hasn't even happened yet. That is something still in our future, the Bible tells us. So what Adam and Eve experienced a few hundred years later, when they grew old and weak and died, that was their first death, and that's the kind of death that goes on around us, sadly, all the time. That first death, that you just grow old and die, or you are killed somehow, that's one of the indirect consequences of eating from the tree of knowledge. That's part of the curse. It's part of the pain and the suffering and the loss and the grief and the stress and the worry. All of that package of yuck is the curse. Those are the indirect consequences of eating from the tree of knowledge, because again, eating from the tree was an indicator of Adam and Eve's choice that I don't think we really can trust God. This serpent is telling us something that we think has some weight to it. So we're going to try this. That was showing that they did not trust what God had told them about that tree, or just in general, that God really knew what he was doing and truly loved them. And when you have that break in the relationship between creator and creation, bad stuff naturally happens. It's helpful for me to look at it this way. Let's say a wife loses trust in her husband. The relationship is damaged, if not over. So when the relationship is damaged severely between the one who is life, the one who is goodness, the one who is all things wonderful and beautiful and good, when we are disconnected from that, we have suffering. That is just a natural consequence. We don't have that direct connection set up where all of that goodness is flowing directly to us, and through us, and into this world. Now, the second question here, it seems to be saying that the knowledge of good and evil causes evil and imbalance. It's not the knowledge of good and evil that's causing it. It was the disconnection with the Creator. So the knowledge of good and evil isn't the cause of evil. It's the experience of evil. The cause was Adam and Eve choosing to eat from that tree, which was showing their distrust of God, which created a disconnection from God and goodness. And that naturally leads to an experience of evil. Again, these are really good questions that are worth wrestling with. I'm sure there is still more to learn and understand, but I hope that this is helpful in bringing more depth to the understanding of why God warned humanity not to eat from that tree. The devil wanted them to think that God was withholding something good from them that they should have, that they deserve. And that's how he tricked them. But if they had simply held on to just the bit of both informational and experiential knowledge they had of this good and loving God, they would have known We don't want to go anywhere near that tree. But hey, we, humanity, we were young. We were immature. And God is graciously giving us a chance to grow and to learn and mature. He's thrown us this lifeline of grace, Jesus taking on that second death in our place if we accept that gift, and giving us a chance, the time to get to know, both informationally and experientially, both good and evil. Year after year, century after century, millennium after millennium, we are getting to know good and evil, which is painful. It's so painful to experience evil, but it is exposing evil for what it is. And there will come a point, I believe, one of these days when we will have such a mature, full knowledge of both good and evil that it will be obvious that we want to choose only good. We want to eat from only that tree that God wants us to eat from, and we'll never go near that tree again. And it's not because God has cut off our access to that tree of knowledge. I think those trees probably still exist somewhere. We know the tree of life does. The Bible tells us that. But I think that the tree of knowledge, if it doesn't exist literally anymore, I think it still exists figuratively as that symbol of God is giving us that option. He has made us free, and He's going to keep us free and respect our freedom and whatever choices we make. But I believe that one day we will never want to make that choice again. We, humanity, all of creation, will see this experience of good and evil that the earth is going through, and will never go there again, where we do not trust our loving and gracious God. I hope that that answers these questions at least sufficiently for now. If you've got any questions about the tree of knowledge or the tree of life or any of these matters, please do send them my way. I love wrestling with all of this and sharing with you just how good, wise, and loving our Creator is.